Hi, everybody. I'm Evan. I have alcoholism, and I'm very glad to be here with you tonight. And why am I very glad to be here with you tonight? Because uh, we share something in common. I think we share this disease, to be sure, and we're also sharing our understanding of this disease and sort of the way out of it. And that's something very special to me. And despite the fact that I had a very tired, cranky day, I'm still overjoyed to be here with you, sort of sharing the sunlight of the spirit, because any of that stuff is really all very on the surface and part of the disease. Um, and So I have alcoholism. So the way that I think about it is, at best, I have, what do they say in the book? A mental defect. That's not how they say it. I forget how they say it. Um, or at worst, I'm mentally ill. And I actually lean toward the second one. I have a devastating mental illness, and which makes me, kind of a crazy person. And I have my own definition of crazy, and crazy is when you can't see reality. And so my whole life, reality has been hidden from me by my mind, by my thoughts, by my thinking, my reactions to it. And so I didn't realize that life was this infinitely beautiful endeavor. I thought it was terrible and I was terrible. Thanks to prime time and thanks to these steps, I have come into contact with reality and live there most of the time, for which I am very, very grateful. So how shall I talk about this? Primetime taught me not to prepare and to be led by the spirit. So let's see what happens, shall we? In primetime, we talk about a lot about alcoholism, the ABCs, the thinking, alcoholism, ego, and self. And certainly, I think that's stage one of this, of really coming to terms with what we're dealing with. The people who I have spoken to who are in the most pain are the people who are not even aware that their thoughts are causing them tremendous pain. They are just receiving all the suffering from it. And I'll say to them something like, well, what thought is making you feel that way? They say, I feel terrible. I'm so depressed. And I say, what thoughts are and they say, I don't know. Those are the people who I find to be suffering the most. So one of the things that primetime really helped me with, and I'm probably not supposed to say this, but the work of Byron Katie really helped me at the same time really start to examine my thoughts and really start to look at them and to see that, as a matter of fact, they were not giving me an accurate picture of reality. So I've really learned that my thoughts are never, ever, ever accurate. At least that's how it sits for me these days. And by the way, anything I'm saying here today is just my experience and the opinions that I've developed as I've, sort of devoted myself to applying these principles being the steps. And that's just what I'm here to talk about today, is how I apply these steps to my life. And feel free to throw out anything that you don't like or disagree with. It's only fair. Where was I? Okay. So I find the steps to be an incredible process. And for me, the very best. As an institution, I sort of got really sick of man-made institutions, because at the top of all of these was eventually someone's ego. And that's one of the things that sort of really brought me back to 12 steps. And that is, there's nobody in charge whose ego can take over. And that's a beautiful thing to me. And somehow us band of sick people make each other well. That's extraordinary. And I really appreciate, Murph, the emphasis you put on the result of these steps. What is the result of these steps? A spiritual awakening. And I'm here talking to you today because I've had a deep and effective spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. And that happened for me. Now, I've been in program for about 27 years, but about 4 years ago, and I've hit plenty of bottoms in plenty of programs and had incredible, changes in all parts of my life as a result. And I'm grateful for all of that. But something happened 4 years ago. And that was right around the time that the pandemic hit. And thank you, Craig, for asking me to share tonight. And thank you also for creating these meetings, because, they were a real godsend for me and others when the pandemic hit and all of a sudden the Zoom world opened up. So I'm grateful to you forever for that, because I was able to come back to prime time and start to come back to sanity. Because what happened for me at that time, not just me was falling apart, but a lot of people were falling apart because kind of the wheels of the system slowed down and everybody was forced to sort of look at themselves. And what happened for me is I'd realized that everything I'd done, including all the recovery I had done, was really just for me. I was doing this program and doing this program because I was trying to sort out my life and get my life in order and get my life the way that I wanted to. And why? So that I could be happy. And so it was, and in that moment, when everything was slowing down, I'd just done this other workshop thing that really kind of messed me up a bit. But I've been working as a screenwriter, and I wrote a screenplay and I got paid for it. And that was one of the things on my list, and that was just enough. That was the straw that broke the camel's back, where I saw that I could maybe do more of that. And there were other things that I'd done, and I'd been successful in these ways, but I saw that there was no other success. There was no, my wife and I could maybe, yes, move into a bigger house, but I saw there was nothing that was going to actually get me over the line and make me happy. At that moment, I knew that that was an impossibility. And everything crashed, because my whole life had been focused on getting there, getting to that spot where I was actually going to be happy. And I realized it was never coming, not this way, because I'd been doing it all at the behest of my ego. I was an ambition addict. I was trying to get somewhere. And I was devastated. I was depressed. There was nothing to live for. I completely fell apart. I had a 4-month bottom where it was very difficult for me to get out of bed. And I came to primetime meetings every day. And I had a fellow in program that I talked to every day. And also I got a sponsor in primetime at that time. Now, I'd already been in 6 years, and I'd been really looking at my mind. And what happened for me in this iteration was I went deeper and beyond just looking at my thoughts and trying to treat my thoughts and all of that. Because what I saw was, like we talk about all the time in here, bottles are just a symbol. I saw that all the things that I had been doing in my life were trying to solve this miserable state of being that I was in. And finally, there was nothing else to chase, and there was nothing else to stop it. And that misery just came at me. And I got a great sponsor at the time, and he had me work the steps out of the 12 and 12, and I can't say enough good things about the 12 and 12. What I like about it, it was written 15 or 16 years after they wrote the original big book. And I don't know about you, I was a much saner and healthier person 16 years in than I was 2.5 years in. And so I find that it's such a great instruction manual. And so I really took seriously what my sponsor said. He said, take this chapter 1 out of the 12 and 12, and turn it into a to-do list. And the items on the to-do list are: admit complete defeat, see my absolute hopelessness, hit bottom. Now, that's a different way of living. This way of living these steps is a completely different way of approaching existence. Nobody is walking around in our day and age trying to hit bottom, trying to fall apart, trying to have it all come undone. It's just not what you do. And so I started taking all this stuff very literally. It says, practicing these principles in all your affairs. So in all my affairs, I'm supposed to hit bottom. I'm supposed to let whatever problem I have, where the ego's in charge. And that's when I realized why it has to be a bottom. Because wherever there's a lack of flow in my life, it's because the ego is in charge. And the ego will remain in charge until the ego lets go. And I don't know if I've shared this with you before, but I've reduced the entire 12 steps down to one sentence, which I find to be a helpful and handy little tool, just in, when you're out there and living life. And that is, anything I take my hooks out of, God will automatically start healing. And the converse is also true. Anything I keep my hooks in, God cannot solve. And pretty much my belief is that if you do step one right, thoroughly, convincingly, the rest of it pretty much does itself. If you really let go and you really say, I'm not in charge of this. So this began, a 4-year investigation of this process and really applying it to everything in my life. And as I started looking, what I started seeing was, yes, the things that I'm most powerless over, right? Because we're all aware that bottles are a solution. Alcohol is a solution. And so is trying to earn a lot of money. And so is food. So is shopping, gambling. All these things are a solution to my problem, but what's the problem? So first, I'm powerless over my thoughts. I'm not the thinker in my mind. So I cannot control my thoughts. I just can't. If I say to you, don't picture whatever you do in the next second, don't picture a red elephant, what happens? Were you trying to think of a red elephant? You were probably trying not to, and yet there it was anyway. So if I'm trying not to, and my mind is thinking red elephant, what's doing that? I, to this day, don't know. All I know is I cannot control my thoughts. And what is even deeper than that, what I've seen for myself and the people that I work with, is the thoughts are just the smoke. What's the fire? What I've seen is essentially those thoughts come from an initial reaction to something as a child. The mind says, this is what happened, but most importantly, this is what it means. So if my dad hits me and my mind says, he hit me because I'm no good, and that happens when I'm 5 years old, then for the rest of my life, I believe I'm no good, and I am powerless over that. And I'm especially powerless over the terror that I'm no good. I'm especially powerless over the terror of nobody's ever going to love me because I'm no good. The people that I work with, what I find is they've been carrying around ideas just like that painful and that life impacting for 40 and 50 years. And what have they been doing? They have been running from those things. Running. With all the things that we just talked about. But mostly with trying to create a happy life. And I realized that all the doing that I was doing was I was trying to escape that terror, that fear. So as I started to surrender to the fact that I'm terrified over that fear, that's step one. If it's been happening for 50 years, there's a pretty good chance you're powerless over it. If you haven't been able to make any progress in 50 years. So as an example, like for myself, so applying this to all my affairs, when you talk about sort of just alcohol, it's a bit broad. When you start to get down to, okay, it's my mind, you're getting more focused. And when you start to get down to, it's this sort of traumatic response to life. It starts to get more specific. And when it gets down to the actual phrases that my mind uses. So what I noticed, so in that bottom that I hit, that part of me, that ambitious part of me that was trying to get somewhere really broke, and kind of ambition died in me. It was kind of removed. And that was a great gift. But I continued to work in my field, and I would have projects and deadlines. And I noticed that I was still terrified about the deadline. And I was like, I don't care about making something great. So why am I feeling afraid? So I realized I was afraid because they weren't going to like it. And I was afraid they weren't going to like it meant they're not going to like me. They're not going to hire me. And so that was a very fearful thing. I'm powerless over that fear. And underneath that is everything I do is wrong. More and more people I talk to, it's like, I love Thibaut's list of the disease. If you haven't read that, definitely check that out. Craig can point you to it, I'm sure. And there's some things that I would add to it these days that I see as such a common thing. So many addicts feel alone and feel like they have to figure it out themselves. That is a symptom of this disease. And so that part of me that was afraid they weren't going to like it was this kind of terrified 4-year-old. And so my step 2, if I'm powerless over this fear, my step 2 becomes, the instructions are relax, take it easy. I allow God to come to me piecemeal. And so since I'm not fighting this fear anymore, and I'm not running from it, I allow it to be. And I sit with it. And I allow God to come into it. And over time, and it depends on the strength of any particular part or bottom that I'm hitting, what happens is that terror, that fear, that block to God eventually dissolves. Right there in step 2. And sanity is restored. And when sanity is restored, then in step 3, you can take clear action. And I find so many people, while they're still in the crazy, trying to find out what God's will is for them. But what I'm finding is, if I really am diligent and I really allow God to work on this and I don't pick it up, that it passes. And that's what happened to me with deadlines. Right? The reason I was so scared that I was going to do it wrong, I was scared of making a mistake. And why was I scared of making a mistake? Because my father was a very brilliant man, and there was nothing I could ever do that was right. And he was also a violent man. So I was terrified that I was going to make a mistake, and I was terrified that he was going to beat me to death. And I'm powerless over that fear, and that fear of that 3-year-old, that 4-year-old, whatever, was running my life as a 56-year-old. That's insane. And by the grace of God, that doesn't happen anymore. Now I have a deadline, and I do the job, and I get it done, and there's no drama. Because I got down to what the real problem was. I saw that I was powerless over it. I gave it to God, and sanity was restored. And in step 3, I can just do the work that's in front of me. That's a spiritual awakening. It's a complete shift in consciousness where the problem is removed. And that is probably, over the last 4 years, that's probably number 11 in a series of things that I've just been constantly turning over to God. And right now I'm working on this. I'm trying to find out, does this work for physical ailments as well? Does taking this power of the step and turning this over, does this also work in the physical, right? So I have this really bad crick in my neck that I've had for 27 years. That's just been getting worse and worse and worse over time. And I said, what if it's the same thing? And what if it's emotional? And so I took that premise and I said, okay, God, this is your deal. Because I've worked on this for 27 years. Physical therapy, doing exercises, got nowhere. It's only gotten worse. So 27 years, me doing it. Okay. Am I ready to give up? Am I ready to let go? Am I ready to let God? Am I ready to apply these principles in all my affairs? Okay. So I try it and I start to get down to the emotion of it. And I find out as I get down in here. So I start going into, it's like, okay, I'm powerless over this and I'm powerless over the emotions. So the idea is these are emotions stored in my neck. True or not true? I don't know. It doesn't really matter. That's the experiment in consciousness I'm trying, applying these steps to this. And so I start to go in there and I realize this is the place where I store all my stuff, my tension, my fear. Thank you. Do I have 5 more?
5 minutes.
Thank you. And so in about 2 or 3 weeks, the whole back half of my neck completely frees up. And it was so much worse than I thought. It was completely locked up, like all the muscles were like hard as a rock. And now for this whole back half, it's like, it feels like this other side. It feels natural, supple. And now it's like I'm working on the inside. So that's taken about 3 weeks. I'm in the middle of this experiment. This is live happening in front of you, right? This experiment of, does it really work to apply these steps? And so far, the answer seems to be yes. Now, I'm still in the middle of this bottom. I'm still in the middle of this step 2 of really turning this over to God. But there's a hell of a lot of emotion stored in here. There's a lot of that stuff I talked about. It's like back here was, I'm terrified he's going to kill me. Right. So these are the things that I'm drinking over, that I'm eating over, that I'm spending over. This kind of thing that's intruding upon my everyday life. And I'm living from this set of ideas that are just wrong, that are just wrong. And so, as I've gone through a number of these sort of pieces of self, if you will, right? And they're all kind of individual. Like, you go work a program around money, you go work a program around relationships, right? There's separate aspects of ourselves. And I sort of look at each of them like they're different sponsees, right? They're like, you have different sponsees and they're all different stages of surrender and the steps. And so, I have different parts. And there's some parts like my relationship to money, because I've been in a money program for the last 27 years as well. I've got a lot of freedom there. And there are other places where I have no freedom. Like body image and all that stuff, like that stuff is very ego dominated. Like the voice in my head says, I'm ugly, I'm repulsive, nobody wants to be around me. And that feels true to me. That's a place where the ego still has a stronghold. Like that's a place where the steps need to be worked that I haven't gotten to yet. But I sort of let God sort of choose, it's not my show to run. It's God's show of like, what's the next thing that's going to be healed? But the best thing about it is each one of these pieces I let go of is all this tremendous life energy that I've been spending fighting and trying to control. And once I stop that fight and that energy dissipates, there's all this space. There's all this more God energy opening up in a series of spiritual awakenings. And so the peace that's coming in is just getting deeper and richer. To the point where I realize it's like these things that I was chasing, they don't mean anything. The only thing that can really give me peace and happiness is a direct connection to my truest self or God or whatever you want to call it. It's the only thing that really nourishes me. So I would encourage anyone at whatever level to work these steps and to work them vigorously. I have never, this last round of it for me has been kind of next level, but all the times I've done it before, it's done the same kind of thing. It's taken a piece of the ego and it's sublimated it. It's dissolved it. So it's an incredible process. And, that's one of the things I love about Prime Time is it's all about, and for me, that's what it's about today is how do I apply this moment to moment? I did step 1 a while ago. For me, it's more like a dance. I learned step 1, I learned step 2, I learned step 3, I learned step 4. Now, if I'm learning a dance move, I don't go, I've already done steps 1 and 2. I don't do those anymore. No, I get better and better at 1. I get better and better at surrendering more and more things. Because what do I need to hold on to? There's nothing I need to direct. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I'd sort of made a business and I made a career, and it was all like calling people and getting out there. And this last business that got created for me by God, I made 3 phone calls. that's kind of the power of when you work on the insides, the outsides flow. When you remove the blocks, God can flow through us more. So anyway, that's my time.